Yeah, so why Nerdio here, right? So you've heard us mention Nerdio. Nerdio is really that enterprise play for AVD. So Nerdio is not a separate DAS solution. Just know that Nerdio is an orchestration. So when you think of all the heavy lifting that MCS for that Citrix on Azure scenario, or any of these that we like, that orchestration engine about really integrating with the APIs natively and the features in Azure, and doing special stuff for you. Easily doing hardware templating and downgrading the disks, and when they're turned off and things like this. You don't have those native. There's a lot. It's bare bones when you go native AVD from the portal. So Nerdio puts that full blown enterprise class orchestration engine on top of AVD. It also integrates with Cloud PC as well. But so Nerdio is basically that go-to enterprise play here, right? So it optimized deployment management. For a while there's no scaling plans even in AVD. So Microsoft's playing catch up over there, putting like their feature, like some of those features that are just necessary into the Azure portal. But unless you're a DevOps CI/CD fanatic, and if you're a bigger shop, I mean, if you're really small, you might be able to get away with AVD native and be fine with it. But once you see Nerdio and see what it can really do for you, that's where you realize what you'd be missing, right? So Shane coined it. It's the enterprise boost for AVD, right, Shane? So it gives you
Yep.
that the boost of capabilities, feature sets, all that stuff you would expect, especially if you're coming from something else like an Omnissa or a Citrix, where you had all these features with what it was able to do. And then you come over here, let's say you go AVD native, and you're like, crap, how do I do the policies? How do I do this? Where's my GUI for this? You're going to be missing things when you come over to the other side of the fence. Nerdio is what really helps with that. It helps provide that enterprise boost for you, right? Cost optimization, of AVD, auto scaling, of those resources. Like I said, a lot more options and granularity in there. The unified management now it has. They're constantly adding features to Nerdio, and when we talk about Nerdio here for us, it's Nerdio Manager for Enterprise, or NME. And so that's really why it comes into play. And
Awesome. So, yeah, when you talk through and there's been a bunch of questions coming up, I've just been kind of answering them. So I think everyone can see the answers, and I'll weave them in. Great questions about the service, about availability, about some setting around like default settings around user backup, and so we'll weave them in also when we get to that section too. So keep them coming. Awesome
yeah,
stuff.
yes,
So yeah, architecture highlights, right? So there's two versions. There's NME, Nerdio for enterprise, and NMM. Say that 10 times fast. M&Ms, man, I would love some M&Ms right now. I tell you. So MSP for managed services providers, right? So you have two options. So if you're an enterprise customer, you're going to go that route. If you're looking to be get managed by a service provider, something that we do as well. There's that route too. So one thing here is it's important is it's an Azure Marketplace deployment. So it's 100% automated, driven through the Azure Marketplace. So it's something that next click, and it will deploy. It's not like the traditional control planes that you're used to from Citrix, Omnissa, right, where it's all managed by them. They're essentially giving you PaaS, like platform as a service, right? So, and we'll show you a diagram what that architecture looks like, but it's 100% automated. It's a one click, and essentially, there's basically, automated completely. So it's building out all those pieces for you. And then it's ready to get up and be managed. And so the out of the box, to manage those PaaS, solution basically, or components, is around $250 a month to Azure Compute. And you need a minimum of 100 licenses to start. So the minimum to get on Nerdio platform is about $12.50 a month. That's something and you'll see why that essentially pays for itself with how they're saving you money with cost optimizations around auto scale and things like that. Fully API driven, right? So this is something that goes directly. This is something that ties directly into the Azure APIs. You'll see that in kind of the diagram below. Those are the PaaS services there. App services, Azure SQL, automation, Key Vault, etc. All that essentially is kind of packaged together, and everything sits on top of AVD and Azure API. So if Nerdio goes down, you can still broker desktops, right? Think of it like an automation engine, or the enterprise boost, as we were talking about. No lock-in, right? If Nerdio goes away, everything's built, right? It built your platform. What you would lose is that automated kind of scaling that's there, and some of the image management capabilities. But you could technically do that with a lot more manual effort later. One appliance it allows you for one appliance, multiple tenants, multiple subscriptions, options, built-in RBAC, as well as in-zone resiliency in the later versions. But the big thing to mention here is it's not a broker, right? It's or a protocol. It sits right as an integration point with AVD, so it's leveraging RDP, right, from an AVD standpoint. It's an overlay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, from an admin operational side of things, we can kind of go into these piece by piece a little bit, and Shane, I'll let you keep going from over here, but
Awesome. So admin or operational aspects, right? So we talked about the automated deployment. We talked about seamless interoperability with Azure and the ecosystem, right? So it's 100%, plug in. If you are a customer, large enterprise with MCC commitments with Microsoft, you can essentially use that. Use that to fund, Nerdio there. So that's something that's possible. And intelligent auto scale, right? So being able to not just traditional like power 'em on, powering off, but being able to, actually scale session hosts, right? So based on memory, based on CPU and performance, build additional session hosts, or, scale in those session hosts. And it does the imaging and provisioning and all that stuff as well, based on various, policies and configurations and schedules and things like that. And it does a great job at showing you how much you're saving, and it puts it front and center. It's probably one of the best products in the industry at showing you how much you're saving, which is great. It's not just the auto scale. Oz has a great videos and go through here in a little bit, but it's also optimizing things like swapping your disk out and doing things like that on the back end to save you costs. Things on around the AVD side on imaging is a little bit cumbersome. Yeah, everything can be automated with like things like Terraform, but not everyone's a DevOps shop. And I've had large enterprises that are like, oh, we're going to do it all manually, and that's great. But then they have one or two DevOps guys, and those guys move on, and now you're left with a bunch of scripts, right? And this is something that makes it everyone an AVD administrator, right? Um, App deployment policy management's built in, you'll see a little bit of that later as well. Um, there's something popped up here, Teams on the screen, notification or something.
I'm sorry. Is it,
Yeah, don't worry.
so I thought they would put that on mute for us when we're in presentation mode, but keep going. It's not.
No, it's fine. Microsoft, Teams.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's actually been better than Zoom lately, but yeah. So Azure AI integration, just like everything, that basically, everything on the Azure, everything's AI driven, right? Recently, so now Nerdio has a plugin to OpenAI, so in Azure AI. So essentially, if there's PII data that's through all your logs, they'll essentially scrub that for you and obfuscate that, as well as integration with their own Copilot to help you from a management perspective. So nice benefits there. Again, this is what it looks like from the marketplace. That's what it's essentially going to look like there. When you actually get it open and you get it configured, you'll see the integration point. So because it's a platform that sits on top, it gives you the ability to plug into multiple tenants as well as multiple Azure subscriptions. Essentially, it plugs into these resource groups as well as VNets and Intune, and then it lights up. Think of it like lighting up the environment, almost like Control Up would light up an environment. That's what kind of Nerdio is doing there. So, which is really slick. A little hard to see here, but I think it's more my screen than your screen. But if you look, and you'll see all your host pools listed within Nerdio. What's really nice is it actually gives you a monthly savings and a per user cost on what actually is a savings because of all the auto scaling and optimizations, which is really slick. And you'll see this is just one customer that we work with. The peak cost is around $30K a month for they have much larger financial trading desktops, but they're saving essentially almost $9K a month because of the auto scale policies. One of the nice unique things is the self-service capabilities. So if you're in a scenario where self-service makes sense, think of like persistent or personal desktops. You want to give that user the ability to upsize their VM, to be able to do power management of their VM. That's something you can't do with Windows 365, right? Go ahead and auto adjust your SKU. Obviously, you can do that here. Being able to drive scripted actions. There's something called scripted actions, similar to what you'd see with Control Up, that exists within Nerdio. So be able to call those actions as well as self-service app installs as well. And this is what it looks like. So basically on the individual host pool, you can essentially configure start, restop, stop. Resize is a big one, right? Maybe you want to allow a developer to resize their desktop, but only allow certain VM SKUs. That's stuff that I've seen customers build custom portals for. This is all kind of built right into the platform, which is really nice. And then gives you the ability to reimage the desktop and or restore individual snapshots as well. Scripted actions, there's 50 plus in the library. You could build your own. This is just an example of configuring clipboard. You probably want to do that in like an Intune policy, or but this is just an example. Same thing with user installed apps. So they give you the ability to, Nerdy gives you the ability, Oz will talk to that around hooking into repositories from an applications perspective. It can allow you to auto provision those apps as well. So taking it a step further from a management perspective. And this is what the self-service portal looks like. If the user were to log in, it says Cloud PC. I just called it Cloud PC. This is not Microsoft Cloud PC, but it gives you the ability to control that Cloud PC or that desktop or personal desktop driven from the self-service portal, which is pretty slick. And the last thing is resiliency. Built-in DR. For a host pool, DR is an option. We'll talk to that later. I don't want to spoil that, but around active, not necessarily a common scenario, but there's some capabilities there that it does enable. API driven, it's 100% out of band. So if it does go down, you can still broker and manage those desktops.
Yeah. Then we'll go into quick zip deployment scenarios. What's annoying about my Teams popping up, it's actually Microsoft hitting us up about some of the Cloud PC stuff we're doing.
Oh, is that what's going on?
Ironically, they're the ones interrupting our flow talking through Cloud PC.
If you hit on focus, but actually that's not true. I teach five for it.
I'm the presenter this week, so I tried to do it on my phone. It pops up, and anyway. So yeah, so the deployment scenarios again, AVD native, right? The control planes included, no cost, globally available, regional dependent, right? It's all there. You don't have to worry about anything. There's nothing you have to worry. It's kind of like any of these others that their DAS control plane, the management plane, is a PaaS SaaS surface a service. You don't worry about it. Hands off, right? So all that's there. You do have to have virtualization rights for any of the with AVD native and Cloud PC actually. The licensing for both of these is not included. So you just know that little interesting fact, even on the Cloud PC side, you have to have the virtualization rights, even on that fixed SKU over there. So most all of you, but not every single one that we talk to, we have to always think about it, right? Business premium for the smaller shops, 300 and under. Any of these others for the bigger enterprise, this comes with it. If you're doing server OS, you're fine, right? It's all client OS where you get those special ones for the client OS virtualization rights. RDSH cal is like we've known forever for server OS, right? And then anything is extra, right? The cost, the log analytics, Azure Monitor tying into log analytics workspace, all that costs you extra to do so. It's nothing's included for that, right? The landing zone setup costs, everything running from your session hosts and all that, right? That's Azure costs that are involved that you have to plan for, right? That's the meter just keeps running. That just hits your bill every month. Anything and everything from that standpoint, right? So, yeah. So, what does it look like? This one, kind of gives you an idea. Everything ties into the control plane at the top. Everything's dependent on Entra ID Connect. So when you move to one of these platforms, you have to have Entra ID of some sorts, right? So if you're on something else, we can chain it for MFA, for conditional access policy. We can do stuff there. But just know that everything here, when we're talking about Cloud PC and AVD, is dependent on Entra ID. So it has to be in play of some sorts. Azure files, Azure NetApp files for SMB purposes. We do a lot with Nutanix, so we're starting to be able to leverage NC2 on Azure for those purposes. But point being is you got to have some kind of storage for your profiles in the FS Logics world, using that, right? So, and as I spoke to before, you got to have your peering, you got to have your spoke and your hub going over to your transit. All these things have to be in place from an AVD standpoint. And then over here, I just want to point out, it supports all the major clients. So if you're coming for something that had like CWA, Citrix, it goes across everything. We're pretty much covered there, right? So in the Microsoft world, it's Windows app. It's still beta technically for some of the platforms, I think, maybe all, but it's a really nice app that they have. You subscribe to your workspace, you get in, that Windows app becomes your agent on your laptop to get into everything. And it does both cloud PC and AVD, which is really cool. And then this is kind of a nice chart of arrows going all different ways, but just know that you have a few different things involved. You have Entra users and groups, application groups, workspace, host pool, and then your session hosts go in a host pool. And then you have Entra ID, like I mentioned at the bottom, right? So that's your identity. So you have your groupings, your app groups for remote apps, your desktop, obviously. These are basically the concepts around AVD and what that means.
Yep. So yeah, on the EVD plus Nerdio side, as mentioned, it sits on top as for advanced orchestration. So it's everything that we mentioned on the AVD side. But and it can be multi-tenant if required. There's kind of a specialized configuration for that. Um, you know, it's PaaS as we mentioned, not SaaS based, right? So you do have to manage that, but it is considered automated. Leverages the Azure APIs and supports multi-region, right? Azure Compute Gallery. So essentially, you can do image replication through, and again, it's leveraging. If you look at the Citrix world, there's MCS, but MCS, can leverage, the Compute Gallery from Azure, right? To basically, replicate that image. It's doing the same thing here, right? It's using the Azure constructs to replicate that image cross-regional, what we talk about a DR standpoint. So it does give you that ability as well from a deployment standpoint. Yep. And then, so if you look from an architecture standpoint, everything that Oz just mentioned, but where you're going to see as a difference is there's kind of a resource group that you'll create where you'll have things like, Azure SQL, Azure Automation, Azure Web Services, Key Vault, Log Analytics, Workspace, Application Insights, all that is kind of tied together. And that's basically sitting in a single resource group. And we'll talk through in a little bit about some deployment practices around that to kind of help. But that's generally what the architecture looks like on this side of the house.